Trystie's Quest, or Kit, King of the Pigwidgeons. By Greville MacDonald. Chapter 13. Kit is put on the throne, Curdie acts as policeman and is made Prime Minister. Immediately the 12 creatures crowded round Kit. Curdie whispered softly to him, "Nothing to fear, Master Kit. I'll manage that skewer. Had a set to with the same sort of thing once in the larder at home. Faint heart never won." They carried Kit unresisting to the throne and put him on it. But Curdie was quicker. He rushed underneath and quickly tugged down the skewer, placed it on the ground beneath the throne, and sat upon it. Then the stoat's tail ceased to lash about and the feet became limp. Kit was soon comfortably seated. Curdie's shaggy head looked out between the boy king's dangling legs and seemed as innocent as he always does after bringing home a lost sheep. Surely, if anything could have done it, that skewer would have frightened Kit, had not the careful Curdie anticipated the danger. Oh, he was a wise and gentle-hearted dog. But Kit was not a bit afraid, and only felt that he must play up to his part. He had once acted the king in a fairy play called Snowdrop, and he knew he must look grand and proud. Fortunately also he had just read Ivanhoe, and had gathered from it some idea of the right sort of words to use. In a very few moments too he found he must exercise his authority, for the 12 Pigwidgeons were now trampling and kicking and abusing the rooty remains of the ex-king for all they were worth, which was not very much, after all. "My Lord Curdle," exclaimed Kit, stretching out his hand, and, with his little pipe as a sceptre, pointing to the distance, "I prithee fold these caitiff lords in yonder dungeon." Curdle immediately was all round them at once, barking and jumping at them as if they were sheep. As warning to the others he took a snap bite out of Crickety. Then they broke away. As soon as they were all huddled together in the distant cave, to which Kit had pointed, back raced the dog and laid on his master's knee the bit he had taken out of Crickety's thickest part. "Not worth eating," the dog said. "Thought it might be bacon widgeon, your majesty, but it tastes like turnip. Think it's wiser not to swallow it. A bit in the teeth is worth 2 in the paunch." So Kit undid his royal austerity and laughed till he couldn't hold himself. Then he saw lying at a little distance from the throne the mortal and disjointed remains of the parson. "Requiescat in pieces," muttered Curdle to himself. The dog must have been in one of his most waggish moods. He was always at his best when difficulty and danger were greatest. "The drier the bone," he would say, "the sweeter the joke. Kings before this parsnip have been known to lose their heads, but this one had lost himself as well, not to mention legs, toes, and every trace of respectability, except the white choker." The only one of all those Pigwidgeons who a snap-bite out of Crickety looked at all concerned, was she whom Kit presently named the Lady of the Wardrobe. She went to help the victim, but he was too far scattered. She picked the tie up reverently, held it to the place where her heart ought to be, cast her eyes up to the dome, and looked as though she would shed a tear, had she any such thing about her. Kit felt that the correct thing would be for him to do likewise, but he never knew how the trick was done, though he had sometimes cried enough to wash his face. Kit, whatever he felt, could at least be stern. So he clothed himself again in his garment of regal austerity. "We are your king," he shouted, "and will, in our own good time, bring to justice the perpetrators of this most horrid and regicidal crime, the bashing of your king and our whilom friend, Parsnip the last, albeit he was little more than a crooked root and a piece of tape. Justice and mercy shall ever be our royal will and desire. Right honourable Curdle, thou hast exceeded our royal prerogatives. Return this chunk of mangold to that nether limb from which thou didst most feelingly bite it out. Acquaint Mr. Honourable Crickety with our royal clemency, and bring hither the varlet to receive on bended knee our free pardon for thy zeal." "Knees bend the wrong way for kneeling, Master Kit," said Curdie as he ran to obey the command. When Crickety came, looking the picture of misery, and holding in its place the restored portion of his anatomy, the king thought he had better make him Home Secretary, and send him home to bed. He summoned one after another. The softest and wobbliest he made Secretary for War, and told him to go and put down war, because, he said, "my mother says it's cruel, and my father says it does more harm than good, nearly always." The one who wore a coat made from a piece of Honeypot's blue frock, he named First Lord of the Admiralty, and told him not to admire himself so much. The one in the moleskin whom, from his first making of her, he had thought rather pretty, though sentimental and vain, he made Lady of the Wardrobe, and said she must keep the late king's white choker shut up in it because it looked so mournful. Another, with the long tie made of Wix's hair, was Knight of the Horse's Garter, and so on, till he had found an office for every one of the creatures he had himself made. They were now all as meek as sheep, though not nearly so innocent-looking. There were crowds of other Pigwidgeons, more monkey-like than those of his own making. They were constantly bowing and cringing to him and Curdie, hardly knowing which was king and which Curdie. Snouty footmen brought them nice things to eat, chiefly nuts and little eggs and cherries and apples. They had holly leaves painted blue and white for plates, because they were hard and stiff, but so also were their prickles, and the silly footmen never learned how to avoid being pricked by them, and then squealing and dropping the dishes. But there was nothing to drink, and, when Kit remembered that he had seen no water at all in Pigwidgeonland, it made him feel awfully thirsty. Curdie, for the most part, kept his tongue hanging out. Both of them soon had enough of the glory, but the crowd of courtiers was so great that, for the present, Kit saw it was impossible to get away. They all, of course, thought he was spiked onto the throne and not made to come off and on any more. They were too stupid to see that the skewer now lying under the throne was the same one that had supported the late king in his trials, whom, like some other historic kings, it had proved impossible to keep in his place. Presently night-time seemed to come, and Kit was glad because he was getting very sleepy. Many huge spiders, some bigger than Curdie, crawled up to the roof by a spiral path, which went round and round in lessening circles and was intersected by radiating lines from the center of the dome, so that, in the fading light, the roof looked exactly like a vast spider's web. The long and creeper-legged monsters then proceeded to carry the lanterns away, which now wriggled again, though feebly. When the last lantern was carried out, the bluish phosphorescence of the walls and roof became fainter till there was hardly light enough to get about. The spiders had come into the great room by innumerable doors. Kit saw, as they opened, that some led into long passages down which were marching processions of spiders, each carrying its lantern-worm on one uplifted leg. Other doors opened into small rooms, in some of which there were Pigwidgeons feeding or sleeping in heaps, and, in yet others, spiders were supping upon their perquisites. But there were two openings which Kit never lost sight of. One had a door of shimmering pearly luster, between which and themselves all the Pigwidgeons left as wide a distance as possible, when they had to pass it. The other was the great hole halfway up the dome roof by which he and Curdie and Crickety had entered. He often looked up at it and at the ladder down which they had climbed. Indeed, now that the whole place was almost dark and the Pigwidgeons all asleep, Kit could still see the hole, because it was darker than the luridly luminous walls, and one bright star shone straight down into his heart, making him long to get home to his mother. As soon as Kit was sure all were sleeping, he whispered to his Prime Minister, "Curdie, old doggy, aren't you awfully thirsty?" "Yes, I am, Master Kit. I could do with a sip, twixt my tongue and my lip." "Don't you think we'd better make a bolt for the door?" asked Kit. "Bolt for what?" asked Curdie waggishly and stretching himself. "I'd rather bolt some dinner than make one for the door." "Curdie," said Kit, feeling too thirsty for joking, "don't be a silly donkey." But Curdie sat down again and began scratching his left ear, quite innocently, as he muttered to himself, "Every dog has his bray," and chuckled. They walked away on tiptoe, especially Curdie, till they were right under the black hole. They felt about for the ladder, but could not find it. Round and about they groped with hands and nose, Kit holding Curdie fast by the collar, so that they should not lose one another. They spent an hour looking for that ladder. They might as well have searched all night. The ladder was gone. End of this chapter.